Today on the podcast, I have Blas Moros, who's a founder in a number of startups, but I think his story is pretty interesting. He talks about being a high-level college D1 tennis player at Notre Dame and just kind of the discipline that kind of comes from that, of just the grind of practicing and how it maybe turned him into kind of a learning machine, following his curiosity and then really building kind of a learning culture for himself. And then over time, building a community around that. And then how did that really shape the startups and the work that he's been doing? So it made for a really interesting conversation. I think there's a lot of lessons here for entrepreneurs to take. And I hope you enjoy this as much as I did. Blas, welcome to the podcast, man. I appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Todd. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, good. Well, I've been an admirer of yours for a while. I think you and I connected online with your when you were doing kind of summaries online, and really, I think personally, just helped me increase the quality of the books I was reading. And so I attribute that to just cleaning up my reading diet, which was good. And so, and then over the years, we've connected on a bunch of stuff, and some of the things we'll talk about today. But you just have an interesting journey that I'm really excited to kind of dive into today. So before we start and get into too deep, what would you describe if you were to talk to somebody and you're at a cocktail party and they say, Blas, what do you do and who are you? What's the kind of overview that you start with?
Yeah, it's a hard question to start with. I struggle defining myself, and part of that reason is because I've very often just followed my curiosity, and I try not to have like a 10-year grand vision that I am this or I will do this. It's a little bit of like an opportunistic mindset and making sure that I'm really passionate about the thing that's in front of me. And I can't always do that, but to the extent that I have that choice, I do try to lean into the thing that I'm most interested in the moment. If you ask me now, I would say founder, right? But that's 10 years out of school and a bunch of like weird paths I've taken, everything from aerospace, manufacturing, to founder in a different company and everything else. So I struggle defining myself, but if you ask me today, it would be founder.
Okay, that's good. The piece that resonates with me is if you find something you're passionate about, you bring the heat. Like I know, I feel like that. And so whether I'm bored or I don't like the work, I'm not a great employee. But when I'm aligned with what I'm curious on, basically there's no end to what can come out of it. And so that really deeply resonates with me.
I think it's a point worth double clicking on for just a second, because I think it's very, it goes against a lot of I don't know if it's preconceived notions, but schedules, right? People have 30-minute calendars and they're on calls all day. And I think what that kills is that moment of inspiration where you're just inspired and excited to go deep on whatever the thing is, writing an article, reading a book, learning about something. And if your life is too pre-planned, it's very hard to just go a mile deep on something. And there's extremes, right? If you just do that and have zero balance in your life, that could be painful as well. But I think that notion, and I'm sure you read it or saw it, but Paul Graham recently came out with this founder mode essay, right? Yep. And the thing that ties together a lot of the people referred to was working on the highest leverage problem the moment it needs doing. And that's really hard to do if you just time box your entire life and, 9 to 11 is just meetings and whatever. So I think there's a lot of that is at least helpful to have in the back of your mind, and not over prescribing your life into these little buckets, but really attacking the thing that, fires you up right now.
Yeah. Well, I think it's good. I think it's interesting and it's important. And I think it's pushing back on society in a lot of cases, right? I worked at a company for 19 years and you had way more structure maybe than I wanted at times, but creating more space to think and be creative was important, because otherwise I was kind of a dull crayon in the box. And so I had to find ways to keep sharpening it. So maybe let's talk about your journey a little bit. I feel like, knowing you a little bit and some of your genesis, you were a Division I tennis player at Notre Dame. And I look at my son who played a lot of soccer, and I think you guys have some similarities on just the discipline and the rigor that you got out of that. And to me, this is a foundational element to kind of you as well as to a lot of people. If you like the grind, the outcome is a lot easier to figure out, right? Where if you like the outcome, but you don't like the grind, you know exactly where those people are going to end up. So maybe talk a little about learning, and then basically you had this kind of tennis career that you did, and then what parlayed over that to kind of like, your ability to kind of learn and grind on building skills. Because I think that is an element that I think is kind of core to like some lessons that you learned, but then you applied to it. And so whether it's, all the way through college, and beginning to, Division 1, or just in general, because I think, even my son never is going to play Division 1 soccer, but I think he got a lot of those skills out of it as well.
Yeah, for sure. I got so much out of tennis. I wrote a whole essay on it, and it's something I reflect on a lot, but it's called The Infinite Game. But the the couple high level lessons that I got out of tennis personally is just this notion of being very comfortable and actually excited to go all in on something, and knowing there's a high likelihood you're still going to fail, right?
Yeah.
And that's embarrassing, that's painful, that's vulnerable, you expose yourself, it sucks. But that, it's a muscle, right? Being training yourself to do that time and again, to me, is one of the most valuable things, because again, it's hard. Like, you don't want to be embarrassed, right? It's easier to say like, I didn't train as hard as I could and I lost, but it's because I didn't train that hard. It is very painful to say I gave it everything I had and Todd was just better than me today. But
Yeah.
I think there are certain things you can only access if you go all in on something, right? Whether that's a relationship or your startup or whatever. Um, and one of the scariest things to me is a life of regret, right? Looking back on my life at X time and wishing I had tried harder or done more. And, I was a good player. I don't want to oversell myself. I tried to make it on the tour. I couldn't. It's hard, right? It's a really hard thing to like
Yeah.
actually make it. But I have no regrets that I didn't do everything I possibly could. And that stems from, actually practicing on court, to sleep and hydration and nutrition and all that stuff. Like, I think I got as much out of myself as I possibly could. And that to me is the best feeling you could ever have, right? It's not the win. It's just kind of knowing you got the most. And to your point, like, do you love the process or the outcome? Ideally both, but you just have to love the process, right? Someone asked Djokovic the other day, you've done everything there is to do. You've won tennis. Why are you still out here? And his answer was so like silly in a way, but so deep. It's like, I just love hitting that little yellow ball. Like, I just love it. And
Still
it
love the
doesn't
game.
need to be, yeah, it doesn't need to be deeper than that, right? He just loves the whole process around it. So being able to go all in while being comfortable or acknowledging that you could still lose, and appreciating the grind, right? Making it a craft, making it something you look forward to. And again, that can be scary. It's hard to wake up at 5 a.m. and train, and you're giving up, going out with friends and all these other things, but it really builds that muscle. Um, what else can I say on that front? I think since I was maybe 10 or 11 when I got really serious about tennis, I treated it almost as work, right? So my parents made it very clear, school is your number one job. You do well there, we'll help you kind of like figure out the rest. But you fail at school, nothing else really matters. So they set those priorities and kind of like helped me work within that constraint. But then everything tennis wise was my job, like scheduling practice matches, going to tournaments, logistics for tournaments. I had to learn all that really quickly, and it was fun. They never told me you have to go to practice or anything. I just enjoyed that whole process. But I think that early training gets you to think maybe more maturely than a normal 10 or 11-year-old, and you kind of have to think, beyond step one, what is the
Yeah.
ripple effect of these different things? And I think that still serves me well today, just trying to ask that next question of, and then what, right? So this doesn't work, how do we fix it? This does work, what's the next step? And just trying to be proactive and take that initiative.
Okay, well, that's good. I mean, those are amazing lessons to be learned, and I think the part I love about it is it's not necessarily about where you ended up. It's about the skills you acquired along the way. And I think
No.
99% of us are never going to make a money doing any of these sports. And I think lots of parents would be better served if they understood that when they are cheering and supporting their children. It's the lessons that you can pull from that are important. So maybe talk a little bit about how you parlayed that into like learning, right? And so you had, we go to college, you have professors, you got homework, all that sort of stuff, and you learn for a test. And I think you kind of described after you graduated this ability to kind of take some of these lessons that you learned from tennis and apply them to learning in maybe a non-structured way or in a different way than you did from a college perspective. And I think this really kind of led to where you went with the rabbit hole. And so maybe kind of talk about that transition from the assets and the skills that you acquired to applying it to a learning discipline.
Yeah. So unknowingly in school, I was very, very good at playing the game. I I had a sixth sense for what the teachers would kind of ask on tests. And in hindsight, I kind of had to do it, just how busy tennis was, that I kind of had I
Yeah.
had to
It's a
figure that
cheat
out.
code.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was. And, it served me well. I always did really well in school. But when I look back on my time, I don't feel like I got that much out of it in terms of learning. And most of the skills I got were from tennis, to be honest with you. Again, I did well in school. They're great teachers, learned a lot. But the real life skills kind of came outside the classroom.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I quote unquote retired from tennis that for the first time in my life, I felt like I had excess energy and time and motivation to just learn things for the sake of learning. I had never done that, at least to my memory. And now with tennis gone, I kind of felt that excitement and that desire to do it. And this is a great through line from tennis. I just treated learning as my new sport. I'd go to the library, and instead of going to the court, I go read and learn for a few hours every day, no matter what. And I loved it. It was eye opening to learn about everything from philosophy to physics to engineering. And again, the basics. I didn't need to go, become an expert. But you mentioned this just before we started, that notion of no black boxes. I love that. That is a very, very deeply resonant thing to me, where it's not that I'm looking to be top 1% in everything, but I think you can get to top 90% pretty quickly, right?
Yeah.
A couple books, a couple talks, a couple conversations with people. And this will bleed into lattice and stuff later, but that's when I think the interesting connections across fields, across people, across disciplines start becoming palpable and exciting, where you're not just in one lane solely focused on one thing. You have maybe a little bit of a broader vision and maybe understanding of how things connect together.
Yeah, that's good. And so maybe take that down one more step. You basically created a website for a lot of this learning, and it was probably more of a function from you were passing some of this information to friends and family and formalizing it, and probably creating more accountability for yourself in the process. And then it seemed like it kind of blew up, right? Then it's all of a sudden people like myself start interacting with you, and you start to build this kind of network and seeing people get value from some of the work that you had done.
Yeah, exactly right. So I knew going into it, I was never smart enough to just remember everything I read. So the very rational part of my brain said, instead of having to reread this in 2 years, just take a few notes and you can review the notes later. And that helped tremendously, again, in holding myself accountable, getting more out of the time I spent reading. Um, but unknowingly, this was very much out of sight, out of mind, was that other people would benefit from it too. So there was no grand plan. There was no let's build a blog or something out of it. Just like you said, it was an easy WordPress page that I hosted to just copy and paste my notes on there. And very organically, friends started sharing that with friends. And the coolest part of it is it's just become this black hole for super nerds like myself, like you, right?
Exactly.
The percentage of people that get excited about something like that website is quite low. But the hit rate of people I find interesting and want to spend time with is insanely high. And it's just been this gift that keeps on giving, where people like yourself just reach out and want to spend time, right? That's the coolest part of this whole thing, is it's just inbound interesting people, which again is a very cool unintended hack of kind of the output of that system.
Yeah, and so maybe talk a little bit. I mean, the scale of this thing, Blas, is pretty impressive, right? I mean, I think, I don't know, I haven't looked at this, but it's over 600 books, right? That you've done on a bunch of different topics. And what I mean, you would say again, following your curiosity. And I can almost see, I mean, knowing a little bit about what was going on in some of your life around startups, you could see the type of books that you were reading on go-to-market and marketplaces and stuff, which is kind of cool. And so, you're trying to find, you've got problems in your world or your life that you're trying to do. You read some books and interesting things to figure out what's going to do, and you try them out. And so, 600 books is pretty impressive. You probably do, I don't know, how many do you do a month? Probably 3 to 5, 4 to 6.
Yeah, post kids, it slowed down a lot. I've had to become much more thoughtful about it. But yeah, probably about that for the last 10 years is probably kind of the average pace, if you will.
Yeah. And then you have these kind of ones that you want to that you've put in the reread section, which I thought was interesting. And that was one of the first areas that I went to too, was taking a look at some of those and seeing what resonated and what, kind of got my curiosity. And so what would you say, like 5% of the 600 are kind of in that ballpark? I don't know. There's something along those lines.
Yeah,
it's a
that
pretty
sounds
small
right.
minority.
Yeah.
And so, Talk to me about like, this now kind of leverages a bunch of domain expertise where you've got elements of all these books and stuff that you've read. And I think what you started to do was then say, use kind of the Charlie Munger analogy of a lattice work, or about how to take these pieces and put them into a framework that you could really think through different problems with them. And so to me, this is like the raw material of kind of what you were trying to do with lattice work. And so as you start to build out this kind of like independent domain expertise and then put them into a framework, maybe talk a little bit about how you go from individual pieces of information that you've read in these books to like an organizational system that really tries to make this something that you can leverage as a framework to apply to different problems.
Yeah. So you're 100% right. The evolution was like reading haphazardly, taking notes into rabbit hole, which over time kind of like morphed into the lattice work, which is again this community of fellow super nerds, if you will. And it was a really interesting process, actually, Todd. So X number of years ago, 5 or 6, let's call it, I started getting the feeling that the marginal book was being way less helpful and interesting than it was early in my journey, because like everything was new, right? I was like a baby, and I just had everything was novel and interesting. And as I learned more, the marginal book just started feeling less helpful, less interesting. What became much more powerful was making those connections between books, between concepts, between disciplines. And I didn't have the language for it at the time. Again, wasn't like that well read. I hadn't come across Charlie or anything at the time. But I literally took all my notes on books, which I think was like 15 or 20,000 pages. And I just started compressing. And something really interesting happened where these themes just came up over and over again, right? Like this author 800 years ago said something about this, and someone more recently said in a different language, but something about something similar. And seeing those trends and those patterns kind of emerge organically. And again, there's bias to the things that I selected to read and all that
Sure.
stuff. But it was the kernel, it's the skeleton for this lattice work that I built that just kind of emerged naturally. I had no like preconceived notion that there'd be these disciplines and these ideas within these disciplines. It just kind of popped up. And this will obviously never be complete or correct, right? That's not really the point, but just like a rough scaffolding, that awareness that, hey, here's like, a couple of tangible practical ideas from physics that could be helpful in business or your life or whatever. And I'm no academic. Again, I'm no expert in any of these things. The athlete mindset that I think drove a lot of this was just what is useful, right? Regardless of like which area it came from or who wrote about it, or do I agree 100% with what this author says? I almost don't care about that, right? If there's a
Yeah.
kernel of something useful in there, I'm going to take that and mine it, right? So I think that's been a really fun process for me, is just seeing these patterns emerge over time, and having that be, like an organic, emergent output of the process, and not a preconceived notion that this is kind of what I'm building towards.
So maybe you talk to me a little bit about the format, because I think what's interesting about it is it's not just about the concept. You try to really give a real world application to it.
Yeah,
And I think in a lot of cases that bridges the gap from something that's academic to something that basically I know in the real world is a problem, or I can, synthesize that. And
yeah,
then the other part that you do really well is, either have some quotes and or the books that those came from. So if you want to deep dive even further, you can. And so maybe just walk through it. Like maybe there's more to your format than that, but I do think that, me as a consumer of some of that has really resonated, where it's like the concept that you can get academically and the application of it sometimes isn't always as linear as I would have liked. And
yeah.
so, and I think you've done a really good job of trying to connect those dots.
I appreciate that. Yeah, again, I have a worldview where you try to make things as simple as you possibly can, right? The Einstein quote
Yeah.
of like simpler but not too simple, right?
Yeah.
And that's where I hope I can add a little bit of value to people's lives, is totally understand like not everyone's interested in reading, let alone the scale I did, let alone the notes and everything. So if I could take the things that I just do for fun, right? Getting back to that inspiration point, I was inspired to do this. It was fun for me. There are things you do that are fun for you that would be boring for me, and vice versa,
Right.
right? Can we lead
Sure.
into that spikiness that each person has? So, really quickly, the framework I found someone described that resonated a lot with me was adept. So that's an analogy, a diagram in plain English, in technical language, and then there's the let's call it like the other resources, right? The quotes that you mentioned, the books if you want to go deeper. And that very simple framework forced me to really understand these things. And,
Mm-hmm.
if I can't tell you an idea and give you an analogy to it, I don't really understand it. If
It's
I can't
Feynman,
draw a
right?
simple diagram, exactly right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it really forced this, again, like most common denominator, like simplest version of this idea, but kind of attacked from different perspectives. And maybe this is another thread to dive into, but the downside for me was this process would hammer home these things into my head better than anything else. And if no one got value out of it, like that would suck. It took a lot of time and effort and love, but at the
It
very
worked for you.
worst, it worked for me. Exactly right.
Yeah.
Exactly right. So that's the rough framework. And again, different from the rabbit hole, which is just the blogs, like the book summaries. This was really an attempt to take all those notes, all those summaries, all those ideas, and make it practical, make it something that you could sort of dive into and implement in your day-to-day life. A standalone summary might be helpful in the moment, but it's more of like the philosophy, the framework that sits behind that I thought was like potentially most useful to put out there.
Yeah, I think it's good. And then, you started to create a community around this, right? And so, you made it kind of a subscription. And, I think what's interesting is you put a little friction on the front end of it, right? You can't just sign up.
Yeah.
You basically have to have a little one-on-one time with Blas. And
Yeah.
so maybe talk to me a little bit about using that friction. You knew this wasn't going to be something that's going to grow into billions and billions of people, but
Yeah.
you were looking for those people that had this kind of innate interest in this, and you created a little bit of friction just to have a conversation with them. I don't know how many people are in lattice work, but you've had one-on-one conversations with every single one of them. So maybe talk a little bit about that kind of culling process and the value you get out of that.
Yeah. So exactly right. I think there's an obsession with friction removal, which is correct in like a lot of social consumer apps and everything, right? Like every tap matters, everything matters. And that's part of my life right now. And I'm like super deep in that world. But it's a different optimization function here, right? Like this was never intended to be my sole work, if you will, right? It's a labor of love. And friction in this case is super helpful because actually like the fewer people the better in a way, right? Like we're at about 400 some, and that's like an awesome size, and like I'm very happy with that. And there are certain things you get with scale and everything, but I'm not interested in thousands of people for this thing. I think it would lose a little bit of its magic. So like you said, there's friction in that people have to apply, there's friction in that people have to pay, there's friction in that I have to meet them, and I say no to I don't know, 10 or 20% of people who apply because they aren't willing to schedule a call or whatever it might be. And again, the optimization function in this case is just people who joining this community is a hell yeah, right? It just has to be one of those feelings where, whoa, like Blas takes this really seriously. Maybe I don't know anyone or that many people here, but the opportunity cost is worth it, right? Like if I meet one interesting person, or we can talk about the intros or the deal flow or the connections, whatever. But like the way I hope people think about it and the way I've tried to structure it is, if you just get one of those things a year, this pays for itself multiple times over. And hopefully it's much more than that. And the other thing I guess like that has been a good lesson for me is almost everything we've done has been pulled out of me. Like people are telling me they want to pay for a community. People telling me they're, lonely or missing a group of people to go super deep on a topic with. Very little of this has been premeditated. And it's been cool. Again, like none of these were my ideas. It's the community. They're telling me what they want. They tell me what they're like willing to pay for or whatever. And it's just, again, like solving my own problem in a way, but also just listening and being empathetic to what the people who are close to you are telling you they want.
So yeah, maybe talk a little bit about how this has evolved, right? I mean, you started off where the primary value was the lattice work and and then now it's really kind of morphed into a community with a bunch of WhatsApp channels. There's a bunch of different topics from parenting to book club to finance. Maybe just talk about that evolution, which you're already kind of doing. You're saying people are giving you ideas and feedback. People are self-grouping because they have, a need or an interest, and And maybe the last piece of this is just kind of what you're doing with the kind of serendipity survey, where you're basically trying to connect people in this network to help solve problems and kind of that theme.
Yeah. So quickly on the evolution, very much started as like, come for the content, stay for the community. And I think that's become way more imbalanced in terms of just like, to me, it's really just the people. Like, again, I really hope the content is helpful and people ingest it and that it's useful. But again, like you tell me, you're part of the community, but I think it's really like 90% just the other people who are there at this point, which is really fortunate that, you know, when I travel, this is the first group I reach out to say, hey, I'm going to be in London for a few weeks. Can I, you know, grab dinner with someone or whatever? Like those things are energizing to me. And there's so much low hanging fruit. So let's go into the serendipity survey and just like the little experiments I'm trying to run and where I hope it can take us. But this has been a problem I've been trying to solve for myself for a decade now, 5 years now at least. But I think there's just the thing that excites me is just this notion that the world is so small and so connected. And the potential for you to know somebody who could drastically help me very like relatively quickly is quite high, right? It's really like a search problem. And it's too hard and people aren't good at maintaining, you know, thousands of connections in their head, whole Dunbar's number thing. But I think there's a world that will exist pretty soon where you have a networking co-pilot that scours, you know, your network and LinkedIn and what people tweet about and whatever, to just be able to say, like, you know, we're dealing with sensory stuff for my 2-year-old. Who is the best person in my network to talk to? And to get relevant contextual recommendations of not websites, but literally people, right? So like if Google has PageRank, this is people rank in a way, right? Where it can kind of like take these random amalgamations of data and say, hey, Todd may be an interesting person to talk to. His kids are X years older, but blah, 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 blah. And being able to connect with those people faster. And the other thought experiment I did, which I promise I'll tie back to the community and everything, but even with this awesome community, even with like my network minded focus and trying to kind of be a connector and enjoying doing all that, I still very much find myself power lawing a lot of it, right? Where I think of the same 20 people almost no matter what, right? Like Todd, if you come to me and like, who's smart on, you know, X, there's a pretty high likelihood I'm going to think of one of those 20 people. Of course, that's not correct. Of course, that's not appropriate, right? Like all the interesting stuff would be on the long tail of someone I haven't spoken to in 2 years and I forgot about what they did and whatever. I don't need to hold that in my head anymore with this co-pilot AI networking thing that I think could and should exist. And that excites the crap out of me, right? Like I think the opportunity for that to become an ingrained part of people's lives and it's more personal than just Googling something or chat GPTing something, right? Like, of course, that's amazing and that'll exist. And like, I use it all the time. But there's very much still a world where that human connection matters more than getting the right answer, right? Like chat GPT could tell me, you know, these are some things you could do to try to deal with a child that has sensory issues. But a half-hour conversation with another parent that has gone through that recently is much more invaluable. Exactly right. So the little experiments I'm trying to do is to understand with a simple type form, like nothing fancy with AI or anything, but just like, what does that process look like? What are people like willing to share? How can we, you know, maybe scrape a little bit of LinkedIn or Twitter to find interesting connections? Who in my mind comes up, you know, searching through our partner directory based on what people have answered. And it's super manual right now. Like I probably did 10 or 15 of these surveys out of 400 people. And it probably took me an hour and a half to get through that, to like really give thoughtful feedback and think about it and not just think of those first 10 people, but search my LinkedIn. And but I think that's the right first step. Make it manual, try to make the quality bar as high as it possibly can be. Take notes on like what worked and what didn't. But again, the hope would be that one day you don't have to wait for my survey to come out. You can just kind of like go to Lattice GPT or whatever the UI eventually looks like and find those relevant people within the community or your LinkedIn or whatever. And I'm not approaching this as like a startup that I'm building. It's like a problem I want solved. So if somebody's doing this already, like please, I would pay for this like very gladly today. but I haven't found it. So, in a way, I'm trying to just keep building and making progress. And worst case, I understand the problem set very deeply. And best case, maybe this ends up becoming something interesting in 5 years too.
Yeah, I guess I want to put more of a fine point on some of this. I honestly think that, use your sensory example, right? You're dealing with it, but like you have no kind of academic or training in it, and so your base knowledge is so small. It's just the child in front of you. Whereas you talk to somebody who's an expert that's willing to give you the time, the gap for them, it's nothing, right? Like this is what I do every day, and so the gap to fill that in a way that's a 30-minute conversation is so impactful, and it just gives you so many more tools and a much quicker mind. And so you just look at all the different areas in our lives where we have that. And I know I filled out the survey. You gave me some really good feedback. I was actually really kind of blown away by just the thoughtfulness and the depth that you did, and so I'm appreciative of it. And I do think that like you getting into helping me get in touch with people that I can actually solve these problems. And for them, it's not much, right? Like
Totally.
it's kind of like it's time, but it's not like these are top of mind type things. And I think that is the interesting part of this is for me to go do this and to invest that time to get to that level is going to be a much higher investment. And 9 times out of 10, I'm probably not getting there, to be super honest, because you're spread so thin. And
totally
so
right. Totally right.
I just think that you're onto something. And if you can create an environment of like-minded people that are willing to donate time in their domain expertise areas, I think we can really kind of elevate the group as a whole. I really do.
I appreciate that. Yeah. I think that leverage to me is the thing that could make this a 10x, 100x type experience, right? Where again, you're thinking about X all day long. This is what you love. This is what you do. In a 5-minute conversation, you could save me tons of time, effort, money, stress, whatever. And it doesn't matter to you, right? It could literally be like a 5-minute conversation. So yeah, that's the imbalance. That's the friction that I think could be solved for. That again, tremendously helps like everyone in that equation, which I think is fun.
Yeah. So let's pivot a little bit because all of this knowledge is interesting, and we can geek out on the people that love to do this. But it's the applied piece of it, and I guess the part that I was kind of interested in talking to you about, and this is where we talk mostly about startups, is you've now kind of pivoted and you opened, which was great, by saying if you had to classify yourself today, you'd be a founder, and so now you're taking this knowledge and you're applying it to startups that you're participating in, and there's a couple of them that you and I've talked about. Blank, the app that you've been working on, is one that you've been working on with your wife. Social media, one with the Maven, that I think is interesting. So why don't you pick one of these to kind of start and saying, how do you go from knowledge that's gone from kind of book to this framework to this network to now being a founder and applying it? Because I think that's where people are like rubber meets the road, right? You got to apply all this stuff to a problem that you want to go solve and a need that you see in the marketplace.
Yeah, totally. So that's the crux of this whole thing is it useful, right? I have no interest. I'm not defending a thesis. I'm not an academic. I have no dogma to defend. If I find one of these ideas is wrong or stupid, I discard it, right? Like exactly right. So there's definitely become, again, getting back to Pareto and power laws, there's definitely in my world a group of, call it 10 to 15 ideas that I come back to kind of most often, right? And that is a function of me being an angel and kind of investing in certain things, me being a founder, me being a dad, all those things where maybe in 10 years there'll be a different set
of problems. Sure.
Exactly right. So yeah, I mean, are there certain ideas that would be helpful to dive into first, or like what do you think would be most useful for the audience?
Well, I think maybe just like I'm curious about maybe just talking about like let's pick Blank from an app perspective and talk about the genesis of that. Is that one of your problems that you did? Yeah. And then basically, if there's any areas that you think you could have applied that like you had some leverage learning from all of the work that you've done that applied to this, because I think those are interesting evolutions. The genesis story is always interesting.
Yeah. So you're helping me find a theme in my life where it's a very selfish theme of like solving my own problems. And I think I could do a better job of that because when I decide to try something, it's coming from an authentic place, right? It's not a made up thing of like, I think someone should build this. It's like, oh no, I'm facing this issue myself. So to start with Blank, it's a very simple concept. We want to make Gen AI accessible to everyone. We want to help people be more creative every day. And the genesis was actually with my daughter. She was 4 at the time. She was interested in learning how to read. We were doing bedtime stories. It was, kind of typical parent stuff, doing nighttime books and whatever. And we had this experience, Todd, where we started doing bedtime stories with ChatGPT, and that was kind of interesting, right? And but the proverbial 10x moment was when we took some of her stories and just made AI images with it. And you could literally sense and feel this lean in experience that we had with her, where her eyes widened and, she had this alter ego of Jaguar Girl, and we created 1,000 iterations of Jaguar Girl in every color. But the cool experience with that was making learning feel like play, where for her, it wasn't, there was no notion of learning how to read. There was no notion of like, what is a verb and what is a noun. It was her own curiosity that was propelling her to ask a bunch of questions, right? Like, oh, how do we make this green? And we talked about the different AI styles, and what if we tried this? And I kind of like poke her a little bit, like, let's not think of a jungle. What's a different landscape? What's a landscape? And we talk about that for a bit. Sure. And that whole flow was super interesting, and we did that for a while. Started talking to other parents. How do you spend time with your kids? How do you think about reading and learning? And how are you introducing AI? And no one had a really good answer. And that was just interesting to my wife and I. She, has her master's in education, and we just talk a lot about these things. But the overwhelming reaction was, we would use something like this. We want something like this. But a lot of the AI websites still are like quite graphic, right? Like, I wouldn't want my daughter just like surfing through some of these Gen AI websites. You just don't know what she's going to find. So we kind of started putting pieces of this puzzle together of something that has to be super simple to use, something that's fun, something that makes it social, right? I think that's another element that a lot of these apps aren't using. And it's been really interesting that, again, we came from this as a perspective as parents, kids, maybe like a reading tool and all that. But as we built Blank, and take a quick step back, it's basically Mad Libs with AI, right? We give you a daily story, you fill in the blanks, this gives you your AI image, and you're kind of thrown into a feed with other people's images. You get inspired, you see what other people do. Even though we approached it from a parent perspective, the demographic has exploded like way beyond that. So it's maybe like an interesting wedge that, we had hypothesis A, and parents still use it. It's a nighttime routine for a bunch of people. It's really cute and really cool to see. But the vast majority of people using it now are Gen Z, casual gamers type. So we're still learning. We're only a couple months into the journey. But as we get back to ideas and what maybe helped, like, I think it's just as simple as it sounds, a scientific mindset, right? Like, not going into it with a preconceived notion, this is a problem and this is the solution and this is how it looks. But just asking questions like, would you use this? How do you spend time with your kids? Do you use AI? Why not? And forming those kind of rough questions, if you will. Sure. And then another, solving your own problems, we talked about as well. And then another equation, let's call it, is just like this notion that friction removal equals value. And there's healthy friction, as we spoke about with Lattice, right? Like, total zero friction might not be the right thing, but it has to be at the right time, right? This is a silly example, but maybe it gets at my thinking a little bit. Betty Crocker had the cake mixes, right? And when it first came out, you literally just added water and you had your cake. It didn't sell well. Nobody liked it. It was too easy. And probably some intern at Betty Crocker had the stupid idea of like, let's remove eggs. Let's remove one of the ingredients. And now they have to add eggs and water. And that seems totally paradoxical, right? You're making it harder. Why would people do that? And Rory Sutherland would probably have a funnier answer than I do. But there's an element that like you have to take pride in it in a way, right? If you're serving your cake, it's I made it and not just out of a box or whatever. Right. And there's an element for us in there as well, right? Like, we could build an app where you just open it and get a random image, but you don't care about that. You're like, that's not your image. Why should you care? So there's that healthy tension of like, where do you add friction? You add a little friction in the onboarding where people have to think of a color, of a location, of their favorite brand of ice cream, whatever it is. And that generates an output that feels personalized to you.
Unique to you.
Yeah, I'll stop there, but let me know if there's anything you want to double click on.
No, it's kind of interesting, and I think like just the genesis of where it goes, and you and I have brainstormed a couple times on where it could go over time, right? I mean, there's a lot of opportunity from like the roadmap exploding into other kind of avenues on this, and now you're kind of out raising capital to support it, and so Maybe talk a little bit about that experience. I mean, again, your network component of it that you had, that you've been developing is probably a great use of that as well. But again, you kind of programmatically thinking about like, why is this a good investment for somebody, and putting yourself in that shoes and being able to pitch it. Is there a lot of lessons learned? I mean, you probably haven't done this, but you've been on the other side of this where you've actually seen startups, and so you know what you want to see. But like, talk to me as a founder raising capital versus somebody who's been evaluating deals on the other side, which you did. I don't know if it was an internship, but you had some experience in that as well.
Yeah. The first thing that comes to mind is the tennis days of going all in and just failing over and over and over again, right? That's the nature of the thing, and that's okay. And I'm
Lots
very
of no's.
comfortable. Lots of no's, and it just takes one, and that's part of the game. But yeah, I think this at the edge of the frontier, humans are just storytellers, right? That's probably one of the last things that will be kind of stripped from us, if ever, is we love hearing stories, we love telling stories. And at this stage, that's mainly what I'm doing, right? Like, we only have a few months of data. In the grand scheme of things, we're super small, we're super early. I'm not going to sell you on my revenue. I'm not going to sell you on those sorts of things. So it's what could this thing become? And telling a simple story that sequentially makes sense, logically makes sense, that this is happening, which means this is possible, which means if we act on it, we can achieve this. And each of those being true and non-obvious and simple, leading to an unexpected outcome, right? So that's kind of the way I think about how to like try to craft a story. So none of those things should make you say like, no, that's wrong, or I don't agree with you. Or if you do, you at least know which vector to attack, and we can have a conversation about that. But at least the kind of hypothesis is clear. These couple things have happened. I think that presents this opportunity. We're attacking this wedge in this way. And I think the, call it 5 or 10 year vision is to do X, Y, Z. Again, rough formula of how I think about those things and what I appreciate from founders is, again, like, why could this be big? Why now? Why this team? Those rough 3 buckets, I think if you can answer those concisely and compellingly, you at least have the framework for a good story.
Yeah, I guess one of the pieces that you didn't put in there that I think is always an element to anything that we look at, either from an investment or from an entrepreneur, this is the execution, right? Yeah. It's like, what's your track record of executing, and what do you've kind of just outlined a series of stage gates, right? You tell the story, you say, here's what I've done, here's where I think I'm going to go. And really what it is a belief on, do I believe in your future? And then secondarily, do I believe that you can get to your future, right? Yeah. Because a lot of entrepreneurs, I think, see the future okay, but they don't do a great job of executing against that. And so maybe, do you have anything that you use in that talk track that basically, is it just the historical? Like, how do you show people what you've done and like get them to commit to believing that you have the ability to execute on the vision you have?
Yeah, it's a little circular, unfortunately, I think, but the best predictor of future success is what you've already done, right? So show me something impressive, something cool, right? Have you built something for fun on the weekends? Have you become number one at Mario Kart? Like, it's like, you can, if they're 20 years old, it's something kind of different than, someone in their late 30s, is it their startup, whatever it is. But that track record of past success, I think, is important. And or there's either references and your understanding of this human on the other side, right? How compelling are they? Why are they the right person? Have they built something like this before? What's their insight? I think that's just like an interesting question. You asked this to me, is like, why are you building this? Why are you the right person for this? But let me pose the question to you. Like, how do you think about that?
I guess, so I mean, I think what you've done in the past is certainly a big portion of that. The problem is when you're 22, 24, 25, you don't have a big body of stuff. And so I guess the next thing that we look at is what's the minutia of the plan they're putting together? Do they understand kind of the details and the accountability? Do they have kind of a project management mindset, right? Is a lot of what you're trying to do. So you have a big problem that you're trying to do. Can you deconstruct it into smaller chunks? Do you understand what's in those smaller chunks? Do you have good ownership and accountability? Do you understand dependencies? I think we look for a lot of that stuff. Specifically, I do, especially early stage stuff, because I think things morph, and things like your initial idea can pivot, right? And so you're betting on the individual at most of the stage of what I do. And so I don't really care. I mean, I care about your idea, but I don't care that much about it. I care about your ability to execute more than anything else. And so we look for 3 things when we do this. We look for somebody has some domain expertise. We look for somebody who has coachability. And ours is like we will string you along a little bit in our application process where we basically give you some research and stuff to go do after every one of the calls. And the question we're just trying to see is, do you understand a good idea when you hear it? Are you willing to go do the work? And are you willing to kind of listen and kind of reiterate your ideas? Entrepreneurship hard because you've been told no in so many cases. And so how do you take good information that's accretive to your idea without saying no to everybody? And then the last one we talk about is just execution. So if you're good at executing, and you're good at coaching and you have some domain expertise, usually that's a good mixture of things for us. We could do something with you. And so, but to me, that level of execution and understanding execution is super important. And it's not just about the past. It's about how you think about the future.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, it resonates a lot. I think is this person on a hyper learning curve? I think it's just an interesting question, right? Every time you talk to them, they've learned something new. They've experimented with something. That progression. There's a few people that come to mind. Was like every time I talk to them, they're like a different human, which is super interesting and really powerful. And then again, getting back to your words, not mine, but no black box, right? If you ask them, about go to market or your acquisition spend or something, right? Like if they don't know, next time you talk to them, they will know, or they get back to you later that day. Hey, I thought about it. I looked into it. That's kind of like how I think about it. So that it gets into coachability and execution, but those came to mind too as you were talking about it.
And I think just the honesty to say, I don't know, right? Like, I mean, the confidence, right? Because I think I think everybody feels like they want to have all the answers. And it's like, you're just like, I think it's even more impressive that you said, I don't know, but I'm going to come back to you in a week and I'm going to have a better formed opinion. And then you're going to basically beat it up and try to make it better even further, right? Like if you have that mindset, like I want to give you a big virtual hug, right? You're just like, that's what I love. I love that. And so, I mean, that's definitely a piece that we look through. So maybe talk to me a little bit about Maven, because I think Maven's kind of an interesting startup that you have. It's in the social media space, but it's not traditional social media. It's really the concept of really trying to not follow people and like ideas. It's about concepts and ideas, not people. And I think that's an interesting thing in the world that we live in today. Again, is it going to be the predominant social media platform of the world? Probably not. But again, it's this niche of people that value learning and these topics that they want to follow. And so maybe talk a little bit about the genesis of that and kind of where you are in that kind of progression, because that one, I think you started before blank, right? And so, and that one's kind of got a team around it that you're kind of building out. So maybe talk a little bit about, because I think that probably came out of your community, right? Some of the lattice work community and some of the topics.
Yeah, it's very much a combination. My co-founder is this guy, Ken Stanley, who has done a bunch of amazing research on serendipity. He's kind of a grandfather to the AI field and this open-endedness research. And he's written a really interesting book, which is how we got connected, actually, called Why Greatness Can't Be Planned. And I'm going to butcher it, and you should have him on, and he'll explain this better. The main thing I got out of it is just that there are helpful objectives. If the path is known, it's really helpful to have a goal. I want to execute on 1, 2, 3 so that I can achieve, tangible goal A. But if it's a truly innovative thing, something that's never done before, being too objectively driven can be harmful, right? It's really, really hard. Ken would say impossible to say, I'm going to start this company. Here are the 50 objectives I need to accomplish, and I have a successful company. If it could be formulated, VCs would maybe be out of a job, and there'd be a lot of implications to that. So I kind of take it as true that what he's saying. The vision for Maven is to increase the amount of serendipity in people's lives by helping them build an interest graph of sorts, right? To help understand, for Todd to understand, you're interested in things 1 through 10. Because of that, you might be interested in this person, this blog, this post, this whatever. So it's kind of like a serendipity recommendation engine, if you will. And where objectivity comes to mind is a lot of social platforms are driven by a popularity contest of sorts, right? How many likes does this post have? How many followers does this person have? And again, there's nothing wrong with that, but it does kind of lead to a maximization problem that maybe doesn't give you the results you want. And what I think is super interesting with what Maven's trying to accomplish is to attack the problem in a totally different way, right? Social media without likes and follows seems paradoxical. How could that work? It might be wrong. It could be wrong, but it's at least different. It's at least weird. It's attacking the problem from a different way. And I think if you can solve that, if you can legitimately provide serendipitous recommendations, that there's something really powerful about that.
And so maybe talk to me about like just how you getting people on the platform, right? You got the people in the lattice work that was probably the kind of it was the genesis of starting this, but as it's kind of expanded, how is kind of word of mouth? How do you find the people that you think would be resonating on this? And has it kind of evolved in the way you want outside of the core group of people that you knew? To the point where it's like concentric circles of close people, beta to a community to people I don't know, and is it
Yeah.
interacting in the way you expected?
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of lessons there. I think an initial mistake was maybe to be a little bit too horizontal. And I think one of the most interesting things we've seen is like very deep technical niches of people, let's just say like deep AI research, have probably gotten the most out of Maven at this point because we've tried to structure it so that it's better, it's more conducive for longer form conversation. There's no
Mm-hmm.
character limit like Twitter. We don't do a bunch
Yep.
of stuff. And because of that, there aren't like honestly the closest comp in a lot of cases is like an old school forum, right? Like
Yep.
from 2000.
Yep.
And in some ways maybe that's an interesting comp. Like there are forums that have gone on for 20, 30 years that don't have
Yep.
likes, that don't have follows, that have millions of people in it. That's super interesting. So in any case, I think that the niches that have gotten the most are those that don't have a conducive place to go super deep on the topic that they enjoy for whatever reason. There's a subreddit that can't support it. There's whatever, right? There's some friction to that thing. The interesting question will be, can we drastically expand that niche beyond like super technical, nerdy people? If not, this will not be a social network that can scale, right? We will need to
Yep.
rethink the business model and the go to market and all those things. And maybe it just becomes a very prestigious community, right? If you have the 10,000 most interesting AI researchers in the world on
All
Maven,
good.
all
Yeah.
good, exactly
Yeah.
right. So
Yeah.
there's a really good post I actually come back to a lot. Brian Balfour wrote it. I forget the exact title, but it's something like going from 0 to 110 million or $100 million in sales, something like that. I'll send it to you. But
Yeah.
he does a good job of kind of explaining, your channel, your market, your product, your business model, and that those are all very deeply intertwined, right? So it's not just change your business model, everything remains the same. No, like
No.
that will impact everything else, right?
Everything
And
else. Yeah.
he has some good graphics in there. Just like understand where you fall on the like mouse to whale like graph spectrum,
Mm-hmm.
if you will. Are you if you're trying to acquire a million mice, as he calls it, and you're spending $100 per, like you're not going to get there. Like there's just
Yeah.
not enough capital.
Yeah.
So he just does a good job of kind of like walking you through that sequence to help understand, your market changes. That's going to impact everything else beyond that. So anyway, maybe that's useful.
Yeah. That's interesting. So maybe like to wrap this up, like you've gone from the discipline you started with in learning to building, the like the lattice work where it's a sequence of all this data to now applying it to startups. If you had to go back and tell somebody that's like, early in their life, I think one of the things that I think from a theme standpoint is this continuous learning, right? I mean, I think that's like a key theme that you've got in all of this, a community component of it. What were some of the takeaways that you would say of kind of your last 10 years if you were to talk to somebody who's maybe not interested in doing the exact same thing obviously you've done, but apply some of the concepts to being a founder with some of the elements that you had? Where would you start?
Yeah. I think the first thing that comes to mind is just having this approach that asking for help is an act of service. That's kind of a line that comes up sort of in my head a lot, where I think I was insecure and not willing to ask for help when I really needed it. And going back to what we said, if I came to you with an ask and you're the right person, 5 minutes can change my life, right? And vice
Sure.
versa. So
Yep.
I think just
Yeah.
being more comfortable with that, and obviously you need to be thoughtful and do basic
Respectful and stuff.
Googling and
Yeah.
chat
Yeah.
GPTing and whatever, right? Like you don't want to ask an expert something that you can Google in 2 seconds. But I think if you genuinely approach someone on Twitter, cold email, through a friend, whatever, hey Todd, I've read every post you've done, and I'm really struggling with my go-to-market, blah, 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 blah. Do you have 10 minutes for a conversation? Your hit rate's going to be pretty high. And that continues to shock me, right? Just reaching out to amazing people that I learned from on podcasts or via books or whatever it might be. And just really leaning into that. And I think it's one of those things that's much easier in your 20s than it is in your 30s and 40s and 50s. Maybe it shouldn't be, but I think you can get away with a lot more in your 20s than you think you can in the moment, right? Like you think you're old and you think you should have all the answers, but someone in, let's say, our positions, if a 22-year-old just reached out with like a semi-thoughtful question, odds are we're going to get back to them in some capacity, right? And that's like, that just keeps getting easier and like more interesting. So I think just like lean into that. And then I think the question that is maybe helpful to pose weekly, monthly, whatever, is just, are you on the steepest learning curve? And if you're not, think about that, right? It doesn't mean you need to, stop your startup or quit your job or, leave your partner, nothing like that. But I think it's a helpful thing to have in the back of your mind of just, are you stagnant? Are you learning the things you want to learn? Are you building the things you want to build? And if not, how do you change that, right? Sometimes it could be a simple experiment. You could try something every once in a while. You can run a little ad. You can post something. You could run experiments daily. You can do that for free. And it doesn't have to be this whole elaborate scheme that you have to spend months and months thinking about. And it'll tie in with maybe one last thing from my end, at least, is just this idea that action produces information. And you can, especially for people who are maybe like more intellectually minded or whatever, I think it's easier to just sit in your head and brainstorm about things ad nauseum, right? And that can cause anxiety and worry and all these things, and you just don't know. And I think a hard thing, but a very, very valuable thing, is just put something out into the world. And again, it could be as simple as a tweet. If I were to start this community and do this thing that offered these services, would you pay for it? And if nobody does anything, maybe listen to that. Maybe listen to that. So I think there's a lot of cheap, fast iteration you can do that helps you learn really quickly. It doesn't take months of planning and raising a ton of money to do most things, and you can get that feedback cycle going pretty quickly these days.
It's interesting to me, like the three things that you outlined, they all have a theme of like, you can't have fear or failure, right? Like in every case, if you're asking for help, like what's the failure of saying no? If you want to, on the steepest learning curve and you want to try some things, you need to be okay with it doesn't need to happen. Action versus, like there's always a fear to this. And so I do think this is one of the things I think society wise, we're afraid to take some of these risks. And we really shouldn't be. I mean, the ramifications of anything you just talked about is nothing, right, in the grand scheme of things. And so I think getting over this stigma of what does success really look like. I learned more from my failures than I probably did my successes, honestly. And so I think that, whether you're an entrepreneur or you're just a learning machine, the ability to put yourself out there without with a high expectation of the outcome, I think is an important piece to, and I think the theme of what you just kind of said in some of these three items.
Yeah, you probably just perfectly psychoanalyzed me of like perfectionist who like doesn't like to lose or fail, and that's been my like hard lesson is like that's okay, right? That's probably my right or my bias, if you will.
But I think it's great. I mean, I think like that's important. I think if more people had that sort of attitude, lots of things get easier, right? You just got to put yourself out there, and you got to go take a little bit of risk. So
I think that's right.
Well, Blas, I really appreciate this. I mean, your progression is this kind of a fun thing to look at over the last 10 years, right? I mean, you've come a long way, and then seeing you apply it to the startup world is really kind of interesting and obviously near and dear to my heart. So I appreciate you taking the time to share your wisdom and your journey with us today. And I think there's a lot of great actionable nuggets out of this. So thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Todd. And let's do this again in a year, and we'll see the progression and have these ideas played out. What's right, what's wrong. So anyway, thanks for having me today.
Okay, well, sounds good. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, Todd.
If you enjoyed the podcast today, please just take a moment to rate it or comment on it for us. This feedback really helps us, and it helps us get the word out to helping other entrepreneurs and founders. Thank you.